Is that me? That's all I could think when I passed the security desk and saw my photo taped to the plexiglass like I was some kind of goddamn fugitive. Big, bold, red Sharpie letters screamed across the top, "Do not grant her entry." I hadn't even made it to the elevator, hadn't even finished logging out of my work laptop. Hell, I was still logged into Slack when HR called me in. No warning, no performance review. Just that fake corporate smile from a woman named Devon who wore beige like it was a personality. "This isn't personal, just structural." She said it like she was handing out gum. Told me I'd be transitioned out effective immediately. Didn't even look me in the eye when she slid over the manila envelope with the severance terms. No handshake, no thank you, no acknowledgement that I'd been there for 10 years, held their mess together through 2 acquisitions, 3 audits, and 1 goddamn ransomware attack no one even knows about publicly. And you know what I did? Nothing. I didn't cry, didn't argue, didn't ask to speak to someone higher up. I just stood up, smoothed out the front of my blazer, and walked toward the lobby like I was heading to lunch. But inside? Oh, inside I felt it, like something had been surgically removed. Not my job, not my reputation. Just the illusion I had that any of it meant something. That keeping my head down and doing excellent, invisible work would protect me from exactly this. If you're already hooked, and you're one of the 97% listening, without hitting that subscribe button, do us a favor. Subscribe and like the video. It helps more than you know, and the team lives on caffeine and validation. Back to the story. Security didn't meet my eyes either. Young guy, maybe 22, new badge on his chest, like he still believed he was part of something important. He shuffled awkwardly when I passed him, like he wanted to say something but didn't want to lose his job. I walked right out the revolving doors with my tote bag and a $12 sandwich still in the fridge upstairs. They revoked my access in real time. That's how I knew it was personal. I didn't even make it to the parking garage before my phone flashed, "Corporate email access disabled." Then the VPN dropped. Then the calendar invites disappeared one by one, like I'd never existed in their system. Not a whisper of goodbye from my manager, who I used to build his slide decks for late into the night while he played golf with the board. But here's what they didn't know. In their rush to be efficient, to be clean and cold and irreversible, they forgot the architecture. They forgot how everything, and I mean everything, ran through me. Not just the compliance packets and the vendor frameworks, not just the integration logic that made the merger glide across state lines without triggering federal oversight. No, they forgot that I was the signatory on the dependency chain, the final authorization, the keystone in the bridge they were about to march a $280 million merger across. They thought they were cutting out dead weight. They were removing the load-bearing wall. And now they had no idea that the moment they killed my credentials, the whole damn thing had already started to buckle. They called me Operations Analyst 3, like it was a middle seat on a Greyhound to nowhere. What I actually was? The person who understood every back alley and pressure valve in our infrastructure, legal, technical, financial. I wasn't invited to the golf retreats or the Miami offsites. I didn't care. I didn't need a glossy title or an office with a skyline view. I had something better, control disguised as compliance, influence woven so deep into the wiring they didn't even realize it was me keeping the lights on. When the company announced the merger, $280 million half cash, half stock, I wasn't at the press conference. No one mentioned the 15,000 lines of logic I'd audited or the 9 regulatory hurdles I buried with preemptive clause work. But I was there, in every line of fine print, in every digital handshake that clicked that deal into place. Quiet, invisible, strategic. That's what they never understood. Real power isn't loud, it's layered. My job officially was to validate vendor compliance workflows across pre-integration staging environments. That's HR speak for make sure nothing explodes when the money moves. So I built a dependency web across all critical vendors, cloud storage, procurement systems, contractor onboarding platforms, each one with a handshake protocol that had to be finalized before the merger could proceed. And at the end of that line? Me, my login, my time-stamped digital key. Clause 14.6 in the merger packet. Final vendor integrity alignment must be verified by the originally designated compliance officer. Signature must be non-transferable, verified under ISO 27001 logging requirements, and archived within the agreed 30-day escrow window. In plain English, if I didn't sign it, it didn't happen. No one ever thought to update the clause because no one ever thought I'd leave, or that they'd fire me without even checking what I touched. They just assumed they could pass my work to someone younger, someone more dynamic, someone who smiled at meetings and used phrases like synergistic onboarding. Good luck with that. My desk was near the back stairwell, gray walls, secondhand chair, a plant that thrived on neglect. People only came to me when their stuff broke, APIs failing, audit trails missing, SOC2 deadlines creeping up like termites. And I fixed it. Every time. Quietly. Without flair. So they forgot how central I really was. They didn't notice the warnings I sent 6 months ago about non-substitutable clearance tokens. They ignored the changelog I submitted that tagged my credentials as irreplaceable per vendor contract requirements. They scoffed when I flagged the M&A checklist's dependency chain as single-threaded. And now, they'd cut the thread. The system didn't care that Devon from HR smiled politely while she fired me. The system didn't care that my manager sent me a LinkedIn message 12 hours later that just said, "Weird timing, hope you're doing okay." The system just knew one thing. The person authorized to complete the merger was no longer in the building, and no one else could touch the controls. It started with a missed box, one little gray field in the secure vendor console that refused to flip green. The buyer's legal team flagged it during their final pre-close audit. Standard stuff, just a formality at that stage. Except this formality didn't budge. Vendor ownership pipeline status, unverified. It had been fine the day before, fully staged, internally approved, but now the final checkpoint was red, frozen. The first call came into our M&A lead, Derek, a man who wore his cufflinks tighter than his deadlines. Buyer's general counsel didn't even bother sugarcoating it. Why is the vendor ownership pipeline unverified? Not delayed, not processing, unverified, like it had never been touched, like it had never been built. Panic didn't hit immediately. At first, they assumed it was a permissions glitch, maybe a sync error between systems. Maybe the SSO platform reset after the latest patch cycle. These things happen, right? Wrong. Derek barked into Teams. "Get it on it. Must be a caching issue." Someone from infrastructure popped up and said, we're seeing a credential error." Then someone from legal chimed in. Wasn't that tied to, what's her name? The compliance lady? That compliance lady. That was me. And by the time they remembered my name, they were already halfway into the swamp with no boots. They figured they'd just reassign my token, copy the permissions, clone the access path, and override the timestamp. Fast fix. I could practically hear them patting themselves on the back. But the key wasn't just digital. It was contractual. Clause 12.3 in the vendor staging protocol. Authorization credentials are person-bound and verified via dual-layer biometric ID associated with signatory authority. Tokens are non-transferable and expire upon employment termination. Translation: you fire me, you kill the key. There's no workaround, no override, no just log in as Herfix. Even if they cloned my badge or re-enabled my account, the audit trail would be invalid. And the buyers team? They were already sniffing around. They knew what that field meant. It wasn't a bug. It was a breach. The first internal email marked urgent hit the C-suite within the hour. Subject: M&A packet review. Immediate action required. The buyer's legal counsel formally requested a full audit of the acquisition documentation with emphasis on authorization continuity and access trail integrity. I could have written that sentence myself. I'd written ones just like it in 3 other merger deals. It was the buyer's polite way of saying, you screwed up and we're looking for the exact line where it happened. They were coming for the paperwork now. And the paperwork? It still had my name all over it. By the time someone thought to call me, I was sitting at home with a cup of chamomile, watching the wind shake the maple tree outside my window. I wasn't angry. That storm had passed. What I felt was quieter, heavier, like sitting on the roof of a house you know is going to flood. You don't shout. You don't run. You just wait. Because the water always comes. They found the clause on a Tuesday morning, buried on page 147 of the Master Integration Agreement, sandwiched between an indemnity header and a formatting error no one ever bothered to correct. Subclause 8.14b. In the event that integration compliance protocols are modified post-authorization without recertification from the original signatory, buyer reserves the right to terminate or suspend the agreement without penalty. And just like that, it detonated. The buyer's legal team didn't blink. They sent a formal notice. Material breach of integration integrity detected. As per clause 8.14b, merger execution is suspended pending further investigation. It was typed in Courier like it had been waiting in a drawer for just this kind of negligence. Internally, the panic was immediate. Slack threads exploded. Calendar invites flew in like incoming fire. Legal was in a spin cycle, trying to map what had been touched and by whom. Ops started redlining timestamps, circling the moment my credentials were severed, and the downstream failures began. Compliance refused to touch anything without outside counsel present. And the CFO? He stormed out of the emergency call, face pale, tie half undone, and slammed the conference room door so hard the blinds shook. Word is, he yelled, "Who the hell signed off on her exit?" Like it was a murder investigation. No one answered, because no one knew. Or they did, and they were just smart enough to stay quiet. They started calling me her again, not by name, not out loud, but you could feel it. In the way people talked about the compliance misalignment, the authentication breach, the legacy architecture she designed. Funny how fast they remember you when the walls start creaking. I wasn't on payroll. I wasn't on the org chart. My Slack profile had already been deactivated, but I was in every room now. Not physically. Worse, structurally. I was embedded in the system they were too arrogant to understand. A ghost in the code, a shadow in their contracts. That morning, the boardroom went silent. Someone pulled up the internal risk register and highlighted the name next to merger dependencies, integration authorization. It hadn't been updated. My name was still there, bold, uneditable, gray-boxed. Someone tried to change it and got a pop-up. Edit privileges restricted to originating author. The same kind of alert I warned them about last year. And when the lead investor joined the call and asked, in that deathly calm way only venture capitalists have, "How are we in breach of our own protocol?" the only reply came from the general counsel, who muttered, "Because she was core. We just didn't realize it." It wasn't an overstatement. Without my final compliance checkpoint, the entire merger pipeline violated FTC transparency requirements. The acquisition packet was invalid. The buyer could walk. And there wasn't a damn thing they could do about it. They didn't just lose an employee. They lost their linchpin. And now they had to reckon with the fact that the most powerful person in their deal, the person they unceremoniously erased, wasn't in the building. She was the building. They thought they were still ahead of it, until the press caught the scent. A leak, probably from someone on the buyer's side, maybe a legal assistant or a paralegal with a grudge. But by noon, the headline was already circulating in the financial group chats and investor Slack channels. $280 million merger tentatively suspended pending compliance review. Not catastrophic, yet. But enough to raise eyebrows. Enough to tighten jaws across every boardroom that had money tied to the deal. By 1:03 p.m., the lead investor, Carl Linwood, the kind of man who names yachts after Latin verbs, scheduled a call with the board. Mandatory. No assistants. Cameras on. That kind of call. He didn't start with questions. He started with silence. Let it stretch for 8 long seconds before asking, "Can someone explain to me why a critical asset acquisition is now sitting on a folding chair outside SEC territory with its pants down?" Legal tried to clean it up with language. Credential misfire. Compliance hiccup. Unexpected termination misalignment. But when Carl interrupted with a slow, surgical, cut to the bullshit, they pivoted to presenting the actual framework. That's when the real damage began. Because once they laid out my architecture, how the vendor matrix was keyed to my personal ID, how the audit trail was structurally encrypted with my digital signature, how Clause 14.6 was a trigger condition, they saw it. The design wasn't accidental, it was deliberate, strategic, and most importantly, documented. One board member, an old telecom guy named Ray, kept interrupting, "Can't we just spoof it? Get an override? Hire an outside firm to replicate it?" Legal shook their heads. Not without flagging the entire trail for audit failure. The buyer would have grounds to void the deal. The desperation set in fast. You could feel it through the frozen Zoom faces and the awkward muting and unmuting. People who'd once smiled at me in elevators or ignored my emails were now scrambling to understand how someone like me, a woman with no title beyond operations analyst through, had the authority to stop the entire train with one missing key. That's when the quiet director, Marcia Taylor, the one who rarely spoke in public calls, unmuted and said, with surgical calm, "She warned us. Last year. I have the email." Silence again. No one spoke, because they all remembered now. The quarterly compliance update I'd sent. The flagged risk report marked high dependency, single-threaded signatory access. I'd even highlighted it in yellow and attached a PDF titled Mitigation Options, 90-Day Plan. No one read it. Because back then, I was just the background noise. The person who got things done so they could sip cocktails at shareholder retreats and pat each other on the back for synergizing asset portfolios. But now I wasn't background. I was foreground. I was the firewall, the deadbolt, the keeper of keys they didn't even know existed until the vault slammed shut in their faces. And here's the part that really gutted them. I hadn't sabotaged a thing. I didn't alter files, didn't plant traps, didn't leak to the press. I'd simply never removed myself. The locks were always there. They just never bothered to ask who held the last key. Until now. The buyer's legal rep arrived unannounced in person, wearing a pressed navy suit and the expression of a man whose weekend just got canceled by a 4-alarm dumpster fire. No assistant, no laptop bag, just a leather folio, and that look, part warpath, part autopsy. He walked straight into the 11th floor boardroom without signing in, nodded once at the receptionist, and said the sentence that finally stripped the word temporary out of everyone's vocabulary. This isn't a delay. This is collapse. The mood changed like a pressure drop before a tornado. Marketing pulled the internal announcement drafts from scheduled send. Investor relations started ghosting journalists. And the lawyers? They went pale. Because what the buyer's rep laid on the table wasn't hypothetical. It was legal death by documentation. Without my signature and timestamp, my original timestamp, verified and hashed through our compliance blockchain node, the final checkpoint in the merger's integration sequence violated 2 critical pieces of federal regulation. FTC Rule 803.1 for antitrust transparency and SEC Regulation SK for asset disclosure integrity. In other words, the merger, as currently signed, was illegal. The buyer could be fined. So could our board. If they moved forward without correcting the breach, it wouldn't just be void. It could trigger regulatory reviews across their other holdings. That's why they didn't just email. That's why they sent someone breathing soot lint and law school vengeance. Internal counsel tried to fix it. They pulled every access log, every timestamp, every encrypted field tied to the final compliance protocol. Tried reauthorizing it with someone else's ID. Tried isolating the fields I'd locked. Tried recreating the audit trail with legacy tokens. Nothing worked. Because I hadn't just signed it, I'd built it. The fields weren't just encrypted. They were nested under dual auth layers, routed through compliance staging servers I'd personally hardened to pass a third-party audit. Those fields required my biometric signature, captured through our internal credential vault, retinal scan, voice print, TFA through a decommissioned badge I now kept in a drawer next to my dog's heartworm medication. No way in, not without me. And where was I? Sitting on my couch, barefoot, drinking cold brew and deleting? Nothing. Not a single file. Not one angry tweet. Not one word to the press. I didn't have to lift a finger. The system was doing what it was designed to do. Fail without its architect. That's when my phone lit up. Unknown number. But I knew the area code. Knew it like a reflex. Internal line from corporate HQ. I let it ring twice, 3 times, then answered, calm as ever. Hello? There was a pause, then his voice, tight, breathless, trying way too hard not to sound desperate. "Hey, it's Carter." The CFO, the same man who once told me in a quarterly review that I was over-indexing on risk language and should focus more on culture fit. Now his voice shook like he'd swallowed a stapler. I was hoping we could talk," he said. "Just off the record. Quick sync." I didn't yell, didn't gloat. I just leaned back and let him talk until he finally asked what he really wanted. "How do we fix this?" I took a breath, just slow enough for him to realize I wasn't scrambling. Then I said, "Per clause 18.7, reinstatement of a terminated signatory requires board action and a third-party compliance witness present for the new audit trail." Silence. He knew the clause. I wrote the clause. And now it was wrapped around his throat like a noose dipped in policy ink. "Jesus," he muttered, voice cracking. I didn't reply, because this wasn't his confession booth. This was my porch. He tried charm first, like we hadn't both been in that boardroom 2 years ago when he ignored my flagged dependency report while sipping cucumber water and checking his Apple Watch every 8 seconds. Like I'd forgotten the time he introduced me to visiting VCs as our risk whisperer, and then cut my training budget by 60%. "So, how have you been?" he asked, voice dipped in faux casual syrup. "Saw your LinkedIn's still quiet? Taking some time to breathe?" I didn't answer. He cleared his throat, switched tones. "Listen, I think, maybe, we could have handled your transition better. But that's behind us now, right? We're all just trying to get this thing across the finish line." I waited. That's when he moved to the ask. "Look, the buyer's nervous. I've got Carl Linwood chewing my ass on one line and our internal legal threatening to flag the whole thing on the other. Just, hypothetically, if you were to, say, re-engage, even just temporarily, maybe we could—" "Per clause 18.7, I said calmly. "Any reinstatement of a compliance signatory must be approved by formal board action and executed in the presence of a third-party compliance auditor, with a notarized timestamp from the buyer's side." Silence. You could almost hear the color drain from his face. The air left his lungs in a soft, stupid wheeze. Because I wasn't quoting our clause, I was quoting theirs. From the contingency appendix of the buyer's own integration playbook, the one I'd read cover to cover when they first sent over due diligence drafts, annotated it, and cross-referenced it against our own regulatory gap assessment. He hadn't even known they had a clause 18.7. I had. He tried to pivot, classic Carter. "Well, I mean, sure, if we're going by the letter, but we're flexible on interpretation, obviously. We could—" "No, you're not," I said. "The clause was written to prevent exactly what you're attempting right now. Unauthorized reinstatement without oversight." There was a pause, then his voice cracked, barely, but enough. "So you're really doing this?" "I'm doing nothing," I said. "You did this. I wrote a protocol. You cut me out of it. The system's just following its design." And that's when the panic hit him like a wet rag to the face. You could hear it, the edge in his voice sharpening, the measured control slipping. "Don't think this won't come back around on you," he said, low and tight. "People talk. You make us look bad now. Good luck finding work in this space again." I didn't flinch, because threats don't land when you're already out of the building and halfway to something better. And because Carter, bless his buttoned-down, revenue-obsessed little soul, still thought this was about getting back in. He didn't understand that I wasn't waiting for a seat at their table, I built the damn table, and now I was the reason no one else could sit at it. So I just said, cool and clean. All contact moving forward goes through my attorney. Her info's in your inbox. Then I hung up. No goodbye, no apology, no return fire. Because this wasn't a negotiation. This was gravity. And Carter? He was already falling? I heard them before I saw them. Low engines purring like well-fed wolves on my quiet cul-de-sac. The kind of sound that doesn't belong next to bird feeders and tricycles. 3 black SUVs with government-grade tint, tires too clean for a Tuesday. They rolled in slow like they were stalking something. Or someone. I didn't flinch, just sipped my tea and moved to the upstairs window, curtains half drawn, watching them park like they were prepping for a press conference. One of the back doors opened, and there he was, Grant Harrow, our CEO, king of the keynotes. Smiled like a TED Talk, signed paychecks with pens worth more than my car, and once told an intern, perception is 9/10 of leadership. He stepped onto my front lawn like he still owned something, like showing up in person would undo what they broke. Behind him, Carter again, no tie this time, just sweat on his collar and desperation in his posture. A few others I didn't recognize. Maybe the buyer's legal rep, maybe a fixer. They weren't talking. They were just staring at my house like it had teeth. One of them walked up and knocked. 3 soft raps, then harder. I didn't move. Then the doorbell. I didn't move. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Then another. Then Carter again. Then a text from Grant. Let's talk. No lawyers, just us. I smiled and sent one text to my lawyer. All contact goes through you now. She replied in under a minute. Acknowledged. Do not engage. We'll let them sweat. And they did. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Neighbors began to peek. I saw Mrs. Linley from 2 doors down pull back her blinds. Mr. Vega pretended to check his mailbox 3 times in 5 minutes. A child on a scooter rolled by, stared at the cluster of suits and shiny shoes, and asked, loud enough for the street to hear, why are the rich people crying on your lawn? No one answered him, because there were tears now. Grant's face was flushed, Carter was pacing, and someone else had their hands on their head like they'd just read a death notice. One of them looked up at the window. I didn't blink. This was the moment I became myth. Not a woman they fired. Not even the architect they ignored. But the consequence they summoned. I didn't have to scream. Didn't need to post a single word. No exposé. No email leak. No lawsuit. Just silence. Strategic, surgical silence. That afternoon, the buyer's official website updated its press release. Merger withdrawn, pending future revisions. No statement, no blame. Just those 6 words. 6 words that sent shares wobbling, froze capital, and triggered 3 board resignations by end of week. I didn't open the door, because nothing inside needed explaining. Everything outside already said enough. The boardroom was half empty by the time Carl Linwood walked in. No catered lunch, no marketing banners, no stupid motivational quote on the projection screen. Just silence, leather chairs pushed back in chaos, half-finished coffee cups sweating beside abandoned tablets. A battlefield with no bodies, only consequences. He didn't sit, didn't clear his throat, just walked to the end of the table, dropped a single sheet of paper, my name typed clean across the top, and said, "She's the only reason this was viable." No one argued, not the interim general counsel flipping nervously through printouts. Not the director who had once mocked my dependency logs as paranoid over-engineering. Not even Grant, who was finally out of breath and out of excuses. He looked like a hollow man in a very expensive suit. 3 words slid out of his mouth like dry leaves. "I'll step down." It wasn't noble, it was necessary. The kind of exit where the room doesn't applaud, just exhales. Carter didn't get that luxury. They called it a strategic restructuring, but everyone knew what it meant. His bio disappeared from the site within 24 hours. So did his access, his office, his entire legacy, wiped cleaner than he ever managed the books. He left without fanfare, clutching a sad banker's box and a performance bonus the investors were already clawing back. I wasn't there, of course. Didn't need to be. Because that boardroom, that deal, that empire they tried to stitch together without me? It all bent around the shape I left behind. And my inbox? It lit up like Vegas. Compliance firms, Fortune 100s, private equity groups. Subject lines like, "Saw the headlines? We need what you built. Come architect with us." The irony? Most of them offered more money in the first line than I made in my last 2 years combined. But I didn't rush. I let them sweat, too. That night, I logged into LinkedIn for the first time in months, clicked Edit Profile, scrolled to the headline, deleted the old one, then typed slowly, "Architect, clause designer, former ghost." No bitterness, no hashtags, no need to gloat, just the truth. And then I sat back and looked at the photo taped to the edge of my monitor, the same headshot they once printed in grayscale and plastered at security's desk with big, blocky letters, "Do not grant her entry." Funny thing, now it's taped to their closed merger file, permanently.